Please, Leida.
Okay. Hello, everyone, dear respected colleagues and dear Professor Harrison. Welcome to the second day of the International World Languages and Literatures Research Symposium. This is Züleyha Ünlü from Tokat Gazi Osman Paşa University, and I will be moderating the session for today. Before giving the stage to Professor Harrison, I would like to briefly introduce him. I know that many of you already know him very well, but just as a reminder, Professor Harrison educates, explores, and advocates for indigenous cultures and languages. Since 2021, he has been working as a professor and vice provost for academic affairs at Win University in Hanoi. His books, The Last Speakers and When Languages Die, have been translated into Arabic, Spanish, and Japanese. He also co-starred in the Emmy-nominated documentary film, The Linguists. His current funded research explores language and biodiversity in Fiji and Siberia. He is a National Geographic Explorer since 2007. And he's a fellow of the Explorers Club. And in 2021, they named him as one of the 50 people changing the world. In my own academic career, Professor Harrison has a very special place. In 2020, I was working on my own book on the Laz language, and I was a novice researcher. I'm still a novice researcher in the field of endangered languages, and I needed support from an established scholar, and he was the first person that came to my mind, but I wasn't sure if he would have time to respond to my emails. And without being sure about that, I emailed him, and to my surprise, he immediately responded with the most encouraging words, which was really meaningful for me. And in the moments when I lost my confidence in my work, he showed that he was ready for support, and he was very encouraging. He's a true inspiration for me, and also with our within the limited email exchanges, he has been an amazing mentor for me, actually. And to me and to many other scholars, I know that he is the true celebrity in the field of endangered languages. So the stage is yours, and thank you for being here today, Professor Harrison.
Thank you so much, Professor Ünlü, for that generous introduction. I want to say merhaba to all our colleagues in attendance, and I want to say what a pleasure it was to collaborate with you on your beautiful volume of collected papers about the Laz language. It's such important work, and I hope to be able to meet you and all our colleagues in person someday soon. My topic today is endangered languages. Let me start sharing my screen. Exploring endangered languages. And can everyone hear me okay? I just want to do a quick sound check.
Yeah, that's okay. We hear you perfectly well, Professor Harrison.
We're talking about exploring endangered languages. And to start with, I would like to teach all of you a word in an endangered language. Would you say this word with me? Kaplaya. Go ahead, kaplaya. Maybe someone can unmute themselves and say it.
Kaplaya.
Kaplaya. So you have all just greeted each other in the very endangered Koro language spoken in India. And to give you a sense of what that language sounds like, I will play a very short video clip. This is a woman named Abamu Degio singing in the Koro language of India. So that's Koro spoken in India, but Koro is just a tiny fraction of the linguistic diversity that we have in the world. There are more than 7,000 languages spoken in the world, and linguists estimate that about half of these languages are endangered. So I would like to talk today about why languages are endangered and going extinct, where languages are going extinct, why it matters, why should we care about this problem, and lastly, what are people doing about this? So language advocates and indigenous speakers who speak and own the languages, what are they doing about it? Now, the world's languages are geographically very unevenly distributed, but they are also demographically very unevenly distributed. And this graphic illustrates how the 85 biggest languages in the world, and of course English and Turkish are among this set of 85, represent about 79% of the world's population. Then we have about 3,000 medium-sized languages. I think this might include Laz, and that represents about 21% of the world's population. Then we have the majority of the world's languages, more than 3,500, and they're spoken by just 0.1% of the world's population. So this is an accelerating trend, and it helps explain why people who study endangered languages or who speak endangered languages feel a great sense of urgency. Some people have wondered or have asked the question, is language endangerment similar to species endangerment, or maybe it's not similar? I would like to point out that these are parallel extinction processes. They are different, but they are connected to each other in three ways. First of all, I want you to notice that languages are much more endangered than species. So for example, 11% of birds are endangered, but more than 40% of languages. Secondly, I would like to point out that we're in a similar state of knowledge with respect to species as we are to languages. What do I mean by that? If you talk to a biologist, they will tell you that something like 80% of the world's plant and animal species are not yet known to science. The biosphere is waiting to be discovered, essentially. And similarly for languages, we only have a really adequate documentation of maybe 10 or 12% of the world's languages. Finally, when I said that 80% of plants and animals were unknown to science, this does not mean that they are unknown to people. So local people are aware of the plants and animals in their environment, but this knowledge of plants and animals is only found in small languages which are themselves endangered. So there's a very deep connection between linguistic diversity and biodiversity. And I can demonstrate this for you by showing you people that I have met in my travels. On the left, we have Anselon Seru. He comes from the country of Vanuatu in the South Pacific. He's a fisherman, and he is able to name 250 different species of fish. On the right, we have Hilarion Zamos Condori. He lives in the high Andes Mountains in Bolivia, and he can name more than 1,200 medicinal plants. So there is an enormous knowledge base about the natural world that is only found in small languages and is not yet known to science. A few years ago, I created the concept of language hotspots. A language hotspot is an area in the world where we have exceptionally high diversity of languages, but we also have high endangerment of languages, and we have a low level of documentation of languages. So we have high diversity, high endangerment, and low documentation. And when those three things come together, we have a hotspot. Now, my team and I published this map in National Geographic magazine. This map shows 13 hotspots. We identified about 24 hotspots, and I set out over several years with support from National Geographic to visit as many of the hotspots as possible, and in those hotspots to meet some of the last speakers of the world's most endangered languages and to record their languages. So I would like to invite you today to come with me on a virtual tour of some of the world's language hotspots. In each location, we're going to see different scenarios for language endangerment, and we're going to see different strategies for language survival. We will begin in Siberia, and then we will go to Melanesia, and then we will go to the United States, and then we will come back to India, where we began our journey. So when I was a graduate student at Yale University, I told my professors that I needed to go live in Siberia for a year and that I would write my dissertation on the morphology and phonology of the Tuvan language. And I did this, but I also had a secret agenda, which was that I was fascinated by nomadic people, and I wanted to live in a nomadic society and understand it from the inside. So this is a photo of me when I was a young graduate student doing my field work in Siberia. Now, my host family was very kind to me, but we realized that I had no useful skills in a nomadic society. I don't really know how to ride a horse or how to herd sheep or anything like that. But I wanted to be helpful, and so I was given the job of collecting yak manure, right? This is a yak. Yaks wander, they eat grass, they poop, and the yak poop is the only source of fuel in this environment. And so I would set out every day following the yaks and collecting the yak poop, and there was a special process for collecting it and drying it and stacking it and bringing it back to the yurt. And what I discovered was that at each stage of the process, they called the yak manure by a different name. So through this very humble task, I began to appreciate the richness of the lexicon. Now, the best introduction to Tuvan culture that I can give you is the art of Tuvan throat singing or overtone singing. So I would like to play for you a brief clip of a young man. His name is Marat, and he's demonstrating the art of Tuvan throat singing. So that's Tuvan throat singing, and I don't have the ability to sing like this, but what interested me in learning the Tuvan language, which is a Turkic language, as I'm sure most of you know, is that by learning the lyrics of the song, I could begin to understand the language. And so in a Tuvan love song, for example, it's common to hear the phrase, "my liver aches." So what does it mean in a love song to say that your liver aches? Well, for Tuvans, they regard the liver as the seat of emotion. Now, we think in our culture that emotion resides in the heart, but if you think about it, both of those metaphors are biologically false. Tuvans say that emotion resides in the liver. We say that emotion resides in the heart, but actually emotion resides in the brain. So even though those metaphors are scientifically incorrect, they are very powerful. And so I began to understand how languages can describe the world differently through their metaphors. Another problem I had in Tuvan was learning how to say go. This seems like a very basic verb that you should be able to learn on the very first day that you study a language. But in Tuvan, they have 5 different words for go. And I would try to use one of these words and people would laugh at me or they would correct me, but they could not explain to me what the system was. So it turns out that in Tuvan, in order to say go, you have to know you have to know where the nearest river is relative to your location. And that river might be far away, it might be out of sight, but you have to know where it is. And secondly, you have to know which direction is the water current flowing in the river. And then you have to say whether your trajectory is with the river current, against the river current, or across the river current. And you also have to add in the information of whether you're going on foot or whether you're going by some vehicle. So using that matrix of information, you can select the proper word in Tuvan for go. Now, if you are going on a journey in Tuva, it is customary to consult a shaman or a shamaness, and they will tell you whether it is an auspicious day for you to travel or whether it's a bad luck day and you should stay home. And I had many conversations with shamans, and I noticed that they talked about time in a way that was unfamiliar with me. Whenever they talked about the future, they used body part metaphors relating to the spine or the scapula, to the back. And when they talked about the past, they used a different set of metaphors relating to the nose or to the forehead. And so after some time, I understood that Tuvans think of the past as being located in front of you where you can see it. And they think of the future as being hidden behind you. So they have taken the space-time metaphor that we use in English and they have reversed it, and that's how they think about time and space. Now, eventually, I gained some skills and I was promoted from Yak Manure collector to assistant goat herder. This is a photo of my host family. The goats are very important to them. They're a source of wealth and cashmere and other products, food products. And so they take very good care of the goats. And taking care of the goats requires you to learn a different lexicon. So I'm going to play for you a brief video clip where my host family are teaching me some of the names. They have more than 24 names for different colors and patterns of goats. And because this is a Turkic language, you may find some of these words very familiar to you.
Kara kalcan şu.
Kara kalcan.
Bu kara kalcan. Bu sarı kuşku.
Sarı.
Bu akkaydı kara.
Bu
Akkaydı kızlı şu.
ak kızlı şu.
So there are more than 24 names for talking about goat colors and patterns in Tuvan. And this is not just a lexicon, but it's actually a technology because it allows the goat herder to look out at their hundreds of goats and to select a specific animal based on the color and pattern combination. So it's a survival technology. So I went to Tuva with the best possible training in linguistics. I knew how to do phonetic transcription, morphological and syntactic analysis, and all of those things that they teach us in graduate school in linguistics. But it turned out that these tools were not sufficient to document the Tuvan language. In order to understand the grammar of the Tuvan language, I had to live in the same environment where the language was spoken because the language was connected to that environment. So lessons I learned from Tuvan is that language is not contained within the brain. It's more than that. It spills out of the brain. It is capacious. It includes landscapes, rivers, plants, metaphors, time and space. And also that the knowledge base, things that we don't know, like colors and patterns of goats, is vast, but it is vanishing. So those are my lessons that I learned from Tuvan. So we've been in Siberia. Now I would like to bring us to a very warm place, Melanesia, a place called Vanuatu, where I've been doing field work recently. Vanuatu is the #1 language hotspot in the world. It has a population of just 250,000 people, but they speak 133 languages. It's an amazing place linguistically. Here's the statistics. And this is a typical scene in Vanuatu where I am recording the language and creating a talking dictionary with my local consultants and experts. This is a typical scene in Vanuatu. Many people go out fishing in the morning and they come back and they will later eat whatever they have caught. So I'd like to play a small video clip for you where one of my consultants, actually two of my consultants, are helping to teach me the names of marine creatures.
What did you catch today?
Clams.
You can tell me the name in language.
Niri? Yeah. This one's Niri. And Nithubo. Nithubo.
You remember?
Troca. Mithubo. And what's another one? One in Horis. Yeah, the other one. In Horis. In Horis.
So these are just some of the many, many hundreds of sea creatures that the people of Vanuatu know the names for. They also know the names of hundreds and hundreds of plants, and they have recently been revitalizing the practice of building traditional architecture to protect them from cyclones. And this particular house here, which will protect you from a very damaging cyclone, is made up of 24 different types of plants. The process is very arduous. They have to go out into the forest, collect these plants, process them, put them all together. But as a result, their botanical knowledge base is really immense. They know the names of all the plants that grow on their island in this biodiversity hotspot. And there's a reason to use these ancient technologies, is because the design and the resilience of a traditional cyclone house is much better and will allow you to survive a cyclone, whereas modern architecture will collapse and will injure you in a cyclone. This is a fisherman, Anselon Saru. He spends almost every day some time out fishing on the island. And I'd like to play a little video clip, which is a special song and dance that the fishermen perform when they are celebrating the catch of a tuna fish, which is a prized fish that will help feed the entire village. But first of all, I had a question for Anselon. I asked him, when you go out on this boat and you go many miles away out of sight of your island, how do you know that you can come back to your island safely? And he said, well, we have something called a wind compass. And so we sat down with the elders in the community and we began sketching out the wind compass. It turns out that on this island, Futuna Island, they have names for 17 different directions of winds. And a skilled sailor and fisherman can recognize each of these winds and can use this system to navigate out into the ocean, away from the island, and then use the same system to get back home again. So it's a survival navigational technology that's extremely impressive. This is the video where they have come back from an overnight fishing trip and they have caught a tuna fish, and so they're celebrating with song and dance. So there's a lot of excitement here, and this song is made up of 4 parts. The first part of the song is sung when they are still out in the canoe, out at sea, and it talks about the tuna fish, but it also talks about a certain plant that floats out on the sea. Then they come up to the beach and they bring their boat up on the beach, and the song continues and it talks about a specific plant that grows on the beach. The next part of the song is sung on the trail as they're walking up to the village, and the people in the village can hear them and can begin celebrating also. And it mentions a plant that grows along the trail. And finally, the last part of the song is sung when they arrive in the village with the tuna fish, and it mentions a specific tree that grows in the village. So each part of this song connects an event, the catching of a fish, with a specific plant that grows in a specific environment. And this is an example of how environmental intelligence is passed on generationally in this society. Now, there's a problem with catching a tuna fish, which is that the fisherman himself Ansalon is not allowed to eat the tuna fish that he has caught. It's taboo for the fishermen to eat the tuna fish. They have to share it with the entire village and everyone else gets to eat. But they are only allowed to eat the much smaller and less tasty flying fish. So what does a fisherman do if he's caught a beautiful tuna fish but he's not allowed to eat it? Well, in Ansalon's case, he takes a photograph of it and he posts it on his social media accounts so that people can celebrate his catch with him even though he's not able to eat it. So working together with this community, I created a talking dictionary of the Futuna language. This is one sample page. It contains more than 250 names for fish that are known to this community. So lessons I learned from Vanuatu is that small languages are eager to technologize, to cross the digital divide. And they do not see technology as a threat, but rather as an opportunity. And they use their environmental knowledge for survival. So we've been in two different hotspots. We were in Siberia, we were in Melanesia. We're going to go quickly now, just a couple minutes, to North America to look at Siletz, which is an extreme case of language endangerment, which only has one speaker left. Oregon, the state of Oregon in the Northwest United States, is a language hotspot. The Siletz people, who are Native Americans, they were traditionally hunter-gatherers and fishermen, and they created shell ornaments and baskets, and they still do all of these things. This is Bud Lane on the left here, shown with his granddaughter. He does not like to be referred to as the last speaker, but he is the only fluent speaker of the Siletz language. And the Siletz have a very strong philosophy about their language, which is on their website. They say, "Our language is as old as time itself. For countless generations, our people lived their lives speaking our words. In all that time, our words were never written. They were carried in the hearts and minds of our ancestors. They were learned by each generation and in turn taught to the next." I really like this philosophy because it describes the antiquity of the language, describes the ownership of the language, it describes the orality of the language. It was never written. It describes the emotional connection they have to the language in their hearts and minds. And it also describes generational transmission, which is how languages survive. So Bud Lane sat down with linguist Greg Anderson and myself, and he recorded 14,000 words, and these became part of the Siletz Talking Dictionary.
Baby basket laces.
Guy, you much quas.
So you can hear a sample entry there. And also younger members of the community like Carson Biles, who's shown on the right here, told me that he sends text messages in the language, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And what I like about the Siletz is that they're willing to share their language with everyone. Even people who are not members of the Siletz tribe can learn and can share and can exchange messages in the language. So lessons from Siletz is that there are no hopeless cases. Even with a single speaker, you can have something like a language revitalization program. Secondly, that linguistic ownership is real. So the Siletz own their language. When we first created the Talking Dictionary, they said that it had to be password protected, that it would be a private resource, and no one outside of the Siletz tribe would access it. And so we agreed to do that. And then later, after about 5 years of using the dictionary, they wrote to me and they said, "You may remove the password protection. We are ready to share this dictionary with the world." And so they exercised their ownership by sharing the language. And finally, something as simple as a text message can help to save or elevate a language. So just to review, we've been in 3 language hotspots: Siberia, Melanesia, and North America, and we're going to come now to India, where we began our journey to look at Koro, which is a hidden language. And at the beginning of this talk, I taught you a word in the Koro language, a greeting. I wonder if anyone can remember it and can maybe unmute themselves and tell me the Koro language greeting. Anyone remember the greeting?
Kapala?
Kapalaye.
Kapalaye.
Yes, very good.
Kaplaye.
Kaplaya, kaplaya. Let's all say
Kaplaye.
kaplaya.
Yeah.
Kaplaye.
So Koro is spoken in the Himalayan mountains in northern India. It's very remote. And I call it a hidden language because until my team and I started recording it, it was not recognized by the government of India or even by the international linguistic community as a distinct language. And even locally in the village where it was spoken, people did not consider it to be a language. They thought it was just a dialect. This is Abamu Degio. She sang to us at the beginning of my presentation. She very generously agreed to work with our team, and as a result, a photograph of her was published in National Geographic magazine, and millions of people around the world saw her image, her name, they learned about her culture, and it was a very moving experience when we brought back to her a copy of this publication and said that, thank you for sharing your culture with the world. The Koro people are very traditional. They live in bamboo houses. They raise pigs and chickens. They grow rice and oranges, and they gather plants in the forest. They hunt in the forest. They're very traditional, but they are also citizens of India, which means they have access to all the modern technologies that we have. One of the things that has protected the Koro language is its isolation. They live in remote villages. You have to cross rivers and hike through the jungle to reach them. But nowadays, roads are being built, and young people from these communities are coming down into the major cities of India. When we first heard Koro, we thought we were there to document a different language, a language called Russo. And we were working on Russo for about a week, and then some of the people said to us, hey, have you heard the other dialect of our language? And we said, no, we have not heard the other dialect. And they said, well, go down to this particular village, and when you get there, you'll hear the other dialect. And it's just like our language, just a tiny bit different. So we thought it truly was a dialect. And the people said, it's just a little bit different. So here, I will let you judge. I will play two sentences for you. The first is from Russo Aka, and the second is from the hidden language Koro Aka.
He vo gyu z.
So that's in Russo Aka, the sentence, these three black pigs. He vu gyu z. Now let's listen to this same sentence in Koro, the hidden language.
Tilele makala.
So you don't have to have a degree in linguistics to realize that these are not dialects. These are very, very different languages. They have nothing in common. And yet the local people referred to Koro as just a dialect. But through our research, we were able to establish that Koro, in fact, is a language in its own right. It's an ancient language. It's a complex language, and it deserves the same status and protection as any other language. I was able to bring a delegation of Koro people to the United States for a folklore festival, and over a period of 2 weeks, they presented their culture to more than 1 million people who came to learn about endangered cultures and languages. And finally, I would like to say, why should we care that languages are going extinct? So I think the best answer comes from this young man, Anthony Degio, who is a speaker of the Koro language, and I will let him explain it to you.
It's me, Anthony Degio. I'm an Indian speaker of Koro Aka language. I would like to say some few points about the Koro language. Why this Koro language is going in extinct. Most of the families to send their childhood outside the village to study for a higher study, and when they come back to the village, they don't know how to speak the language, their mother tongue. When a young girl or young man, a young boy could not speak a Koro language properly, and people used to mock at them. So it is a saying that loss of culture is loss of identity. That means if we lose our culture, then suddenly we are losing our identity. So we must continue our Koro language, continue our this traditional customs and languages, and follow the our forefathers' teachings.
So Anthony makes a very eloquent statement here. He's talking about his own life. As a young child, he was sent away from his village, a long journey to live in a boarding school in a city. And at the boarding school, he was treated well and educated, but he did not have an opportunity to speak his language. And so when he came back to the village a few years later, he did not speak it perfectly. People made fun of him and he began to lose his confidence. Now he speaks 5 other languages, so he could easily have just abandoned the Koro language, but instead he has articulated a very strong argument and philosophy about how the language helps connect to the ancestors and how it must be maintained. So Anthony is what I would call a language warrior. He is a person who is fighting to keep his language alive. Another language warrior I met is this young man, Songay Nimasau, and this photograph was taken by Chris Rainier, who's a famous National Geographic photographer, and National Geographic photographers tend to look at culture in a certain way. They like very traditional culture. So Chris took this beautiful photo, but I asked him, I said, okay, I would like you to photograph Songay in his everyday appearance. So in his everyday appearance, he looks like this, which is a very different set of cultural norms, as you can see. And he has come up with a brilliant strategy for saving his language, and I would like to play that directly for you. These are 2 young men from the Koro community, Songay and Kandu, and they are showing how they are saving their language.
Ane na leboda jimeve, ane na leboda jimeve. Ada du chen ba suna du chen ba pa ta khala mujtro khanla. Ada du chen ba suna du chen ba pa ta khala mujtro khanla.
So you don't know this language, but I know that you will immediately recognize the genre. This, of course, is hip hop. It's a song about hot chili peppers and romance, and it's a style of singing that the elders in the community somewhat disapprove of. And so what could make the language more appealing and more cool for the young generation than to hear it in this way? So this is how you save a language. Lessons from Koro are that we still don't know how many languages there are in the world. At the beginning of my talk, I said 7,000. And many of them are going extinct, but we are still finding languages that were previously not recognized. And so we come up against the dialect versus language problem, and Koro is an example of something that is not a dialect. It is a distinct language. And globalization has positive effects. Koro was never heard outside of its small villages up in the mountains, and now it has a global audience and a global impact. So what good is language diversity? Why should we keep a language like Koro, a language like Lazuri? Why should we keep them? Isn't it progress for everyone to speak major world languages? I like to say that every language provides different ways of thinking, different metaphors for seeing the world, different ways of solving problems. And no culture has a monopoly on genius. Every culture has brilliant thinkers, brilliant poets, and people who express themselves through their language. So if we care about intellectual diversity, we have to care about language diversity, and we have to work to protect it. And I will close by saying kaplaya, which also means thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Harrison, for this extremely insightful and informative talk. We are going to take questions. You can raise your hand if you have any questions and turn on your microphone and directly ask your questions if you have any questions.
Thank you, everyone. It's hard to speak to an audience that you can't see, so I'm imagining your faces, and really appreciative of you attending the lecture. So,
when we are waiting for the questions, actually, can I ask a question?
Please.
I was going to ask about the extent to which language revitalization can be realized. We saw that all these dying languages are influenced by one dominant culture. I mean, in terms of the culture, the pronunciation, Especially, I think the pronunciation aspect of these languages makes me think whether we can really achieve a full revitalization. Can we do that? I don't know if I made my question clear.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Unlu. That's a very clear question. And, I just want to say that you are also a language warrior. You are a person who is advocating for the survival of the Lazuri language. And, it's a good question. Is a full revitalization possible? Certainly, most languages will never go back to a state where people speak them monolingually. That is probably a thing of the past. I think in the future, small languages will exist bilingually, which means they will be borrowing and they will be in contact with big languages, and that's inevitable, but that's okay. Look at English. English has borrowed, most of its vocabulary from French, and the vitality of English is still strong. So borrowing or contact does not destroy a language if the speakers believe in it and they use it, and they will update it and adapt it, and they'll do creative things like hip hop. I wonder if there is Lazuri hip hop, for example. So, languages, living languages are always borrowing, they're always changing, and they exist bilingually. And so I think that is the future for minority languages, is to coexist with global languages.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I don't think Lazuri hip hop exists at the moment. Maybe in the future. Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions, any comments?
Züleyha Hocam, I have just a little announcement for Professor Harrison. You can stop sharing your screen, Professor Harrison, so that we can see your faces on the screen.
Okay. Ibrahim Hocam, I think you have a question. You can just turn on your microphone.
Go ahead. I see your question. I can't hear you yet. Go ahead. I still can't hear you. You're still on mute.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, we don't hear you, unfortunately.
Have you unmuted yourself?
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah, now
Okay.
fine. Now fine.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Headphones. So sorry. Dear Professor, thank you for this great keynote. I have a question about the relation between culture and language. The linguists like Eric Wolf and Anna Wierspika think that being enclosed in a single language means being enclosed in a worldview. So considering you studied the tribes you studied, do you think that they have their own certain worldviews? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Great question. I am aware of the work that you mentioned, especially by Anna Wierspika. Yes, I think that each language offers a distinct worldview, and I've given examples of that. For example, metaphors about time and space, the connections to the local environment, the botanical knowledge, navigational systems, the wind compass that I mentioned. All of those are a distinct worldview. We can describe them. I can describe them in English and I can explain them, but they don't function in English. They're not a functional technology. When you translate them, they cease being that. And so, yes, I think every language provides a unique worldview, and the smaller the language is, and the more it's connected to a specific place, the more detailed knowledge it can contain about the environment. Whereas English, because it's a global language, it tends to be a little less connected to any specific place. Whereas the indigenous languages I study, as I said about Tuvan, you can't even describe the grammar of the language without understanding how it connects to the landscape. It's part of the morphology, it's part of the syntax of the language. The environment is connected into the grammar of the language. And So yes, when I had a Tuvan friend visit me in New York City once, and on the second day we were walking around Manhattan, and he said, "Where's the river?" You know, he wanted to know where the river was so that he could calibrate his orientation system, right? And it led to some really interesting conversations. And so, you know, as a speaker of Tuvan, it was necessary for him to know the topography in order to use his language properly. And so there are many other examples like that where you can find that whereas in English or in Turkish, we have a kind of generic description, in an indigenous language, the description and the connection to the environment can be very precise. So yes, I do find that to be true.
Thank you so much.
Thank you once again. Can I also ask another question while we are waiting for? Okay, Hatice Hocam, please go ahead.
Professor Harrison, thank you for this amazing talk. It was really moving and inspiring. I have a question. I've noticed that during your presentation, you kind of emphasized that technology can be a kind of tool to revitalize those endangered languages. Because, to our common knowledge, the technology is a kind of threat to the languages. So I just wonder how you see it. Can you make it more specific and give some other details to revitalize languages, to use to adapt technology?
Absolutely. So I used to think that too. I used to think that globalization is a threat to languages, technology is a threat to language. But then I began to listen and observe how are indigenous language warriors, how are they using technology to preserve their languages? And there are many creative strategies. Texting in a language that only has a few speakers, right? Creating hip hop songs in a language, which then go viral on YouTube, right? So the Koro community has created a global platform for itself. It has tens of thousands of views on YouTube, and also is very active on Facebook. So many endangered language communities are active on Facebook. Some languages that are spoken by a very scattered diaspora of people have created virtual communities on social media so that they can come together and talk about their language. So there are many creative ways that indigenous communities have leveraged technology to sustain their languages. And I think some great ideas are coming, you know, from these communities. So we have to listen to them. And if they believe that technology is a supportive thing for the language, then we accept that. So
yeah, so they have the kind. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I've created a platform. I've created a platform called the Talking Dictionary. You can find it at talkingdictionary.com, which has more than 250 languages, and these are community-created dictionaries, and it's a way of preserving the language.
So it's a kind of different awareness that they have. I mean, we, the speakers of major languages, we don't have that awareness, but they are trying to protect their identity and languages through those tools, huh? Very nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question and for the answer. Okay, I'm just checking whether we have other questions. I want to ask one, maybe a final question. Can we also count the dialects as dying, or should we focus on, you know, I mean, in Turkey, this is something I'm noticing. There is one standard dialect and it's the dominant one, and all the regional ones through the education mostly are being used less and less. And is this the procedure that goes towards language extinction?
Yes,
and
it
should
is.
we
Absolutely.
focus on this?
It is. You know, I have not focused on it in my career, but I have observed this happening. You know, I know that in Germany, you know, Germany also has many regional dialects of German. Some of them are almost incomprehensible. Like if you speak the Schwabian dialect, you know, and then you go to Berlin, they can't really understand you. And my German friends tell me that speaking a regional dialect used to be a source of embarrassment in Germany, that people were ashamed of it. They would try to change it as soon as they could. But sometime in the 2000s, there was a change, and people began to express pride in the regional dialects of German and say, yeah, I don't need to give up my regional dialects. I can speak Hochdeutsch, you know, I can speak Standard German, and I can also speak Schwabian, you know, when I'm talking to my grandmother or when I want to. And so they realized that it was a false choice. They don't have to give up one to speak the other. They can be bilingual, you know. So I don't know if this might happen in Turkey, where people begin to develop a sense of pride in the regional dialects, but that's a necessary prerequisite. The language will continue to decline as long as people feel ashamed or embarrassed of it, or they feel that it's less valuable. And so you have to change that mentality. They have to have pride in it. They have to feel ownership. They have to feel that it has value. And the very youngest speakers in the community have to believe this. The 5- and 6-year-olds, they're the ones making the decision. And if five-year-olds believe that it's valuable, then it will survive. So,
thank you.
Well, I want to thank the whole conference. I really wish I could have attended more of the conference. It looks like such a wonderful program, and I look forward to someday attending an in-person conference with many of you. So, greetings from Vietnam, and
thank you very much for sparing time for us and giving the keynote for today. It was a great pleasure for all of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is the end of the session. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating and being here and for asking questions. So have a great day. I'm ending the session here. Okay. Bye-bye.